There's proper Hansa energy to it all as well. I mean, I've got a whole series of scars all over me to show you all the times where I remember getting, lessons about safety and things, what you don't do and things. And, so I've got a big scar here where I cut down to the bone, by using a knife towards myself. All these things you get taught not to do. Got a big hole in my forehead where I pulled a crowbar towards myself and stuck it in my forehead.
Yep. Well, when it comes to scars, it's a learning experience plus a good story.
You certainly remember the lesson better when you've hurt yourself doing it wrong.
Hey everyone, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from Good Morn, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international Hansa accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cyrilla of Sintra, across the continent. You guys have been getting the same notifications for the last, 3-4 episodes, so I'm gonna run through them kinda quick. But if you do need any of the links for any of these announcements, they're all available in the show notes at breakfastmoclair.com. So the usual items on the agenda for today: you can apply to be a guest on Breakfast Beauclair Seasons 5 and 6 at bit.ly/witcherguest. You can take the annual listener survey at bit.ly/listenersurvey2022. And we have our 2 Hansa meetups, one in Australia in April and one in Austria in October. So if you're interested in either of those, please join the Hansa Discord so we can get you in the travel planning groups. And now that those are all out of the way, welcome to 2023. Happy New Year. I hope that you all had a lovely start to your year. Thank you, as always, to our patrons and producer-level patrons: Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise; Katie, the Redhead of Toussaint; Jacob B., Avo of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World; Charlotte from Vangerberg Glamorai; Red Kite, the Original Roach; Cottinger's Cat; Libby, Wolf, John of Riblia; Tom from Australia; Jill Kate, the Tabby Witch; Ollie from Sweden; James Carson III; Salaside Sorcerer; a Toussaint Knight; Miriam of Temeria; Softie, and Mary the Moo. If you would like to learn more about becoming a patron of the show, head over to patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. This week, and for every Blood Origin episode, patrons will receive the Quiz of Surprise in video format. It's new for these 4 episodes. So if you're interested in actually seeing an unedited version of what happens during Quiz of Surprise with our little mugs, you could do so at patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Ben from the US and John, aka Softie from the UK, call in to discuss Netflix's The Witcher Blood Origin, episode 101 of Ballads, Brawlers, and Bloodied Blades. Join us as we discuss our standouts and critiques of the episode, how the framing narrative eases the viewer into the prequel, pre-conjunction Elven architecture, the early journey of our protagonists and how their internal conflicts are illustrated in combat, and whether or not the betrayal of the monarchies was justified. Plus, Softie brings a revelation of monolithic proportions. Just as an FYI, we'll be following a new discussion format for these 4 Blood Origin podcast episodes. Instead of scene by scene, we'll open with a brief synopsis of the episode before answering book club-styled questions to dig in more to the characters, plot, and themes of each episode. I'm excited to trial a new format after 70 episodes, so let me know if you have any feedback on the new structure via email or social media. In our mid-episode news segment, Tidings from Toussaint, Lars from Witcherflix shares some insight into Season 3 of The Witcher on Netflix. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Blood Origin, episode 101 of Ballads, Brawlers, and Bloodied Blades. Hey everyone, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're kicking off The Witcher Blood Origin while welcoming 2 new members of our Hansa to the show. You'll recognize both of my guests from their frequent messages in the Hansa Discord. My first guest is a general contractor in upstate New York, and my second is a Squall developer in Northeast England with a background in history. Please welcome Ben from the US and John, aka Softie from the UK. Hey guys.
Hiya.
So lovely to have you both on the podcast. I'm so excited for this block of episodes because it's all new guests who are first-timers on the show, starting with you 2. As is standard operating procedure around Breakfast in Beauclair, can you guys tell us a little bit about how you got into The Witcher?
Well, I was aware of The Witcher, never played any of the games. Once I saw the trailer for the show, I'm like, I'm sold. Give me the books.
Yeah.
I read all the books during the pandemic. I tried getting into Witcher 3, but I'm just not as committed into video games as I used to be. So.
Yeah. What about you, Softie?
Well, I was first aware of The Witcher from seeing The Witcher 3 being advertised everywhere. And it kind of put me off because of the 3. And I thought, I'm not jumping in late. I'd seen books around, but I thought they were tie-ins with the video game. And they had quite an aggressive marketing saying, the greatest open world game of all time. And it's like, I'm playing Skyrim, don't tell me that. It's one of those things. So I was a little late to the party. And so really my first real experience of it was the show. And I was sort of blown away by it. I was amazed. It was like, this is not like something I've seen before. I want to know more. So found out that the books were nothing to do with the games and that this was a whole thing that I'd somehow missed out on. And was kicking myself. So I got the first book straight away and read it in a night and then bought all the others immediately, started voraciously reading again and again. So I read them all through twice.
Yeah.
Did a search online. Thought, got to discuss this with somebody. This is great. Googled, what's the best podcast for The Witcher books, and Breakfast in Beauclair just kept coming up. So I joined the Discord.
That's mine.
There you go. And then I got The Witcher 3 and enjoyed playing that too. So I've got the full set now.
Yeah. Oh, that's so much fun. I was actually curious because both of you are really active in the Hansa Discord, of course, and both of you have become staples in there. How you did find the podcast and the Discord at Softie, it sounds like you were kind of seeking out opportunities to chat with people about the world and about the lore. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, I wanted to find a podcast because I was starting to look into podcasts and for anything of my interest, and that was about the same time I was reading the book. So okay, let's find something about The Witcher. Breakfast in Beauclair showed up, and like, okay, that'll work.
It's been so nice to get to know you guys as part of the community, of course, over the last, at least year or 2 years that you guys have been around. It's such an interesting community, I feel like.
There's a reason they call it a cult.
There is a reason why it is sometimes, but not officially called a cult,
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
This is going to be a bit of a different episode. It's going to be a new format that we're going to try out for these Blood Origin episodes. So instead of being scene by scene, we'll be taking a look at the episode as a whole and asking critical questions about the plot and the storyline, production, that sort of thing. So today we'll kick off our discussion of Netflix's The Witcher Blood Origin with the series premiere episode 101 of Ballads, Brawlers, and Bloodied Blades, in which a tavern brawl puts Éile on a collision course with destiny, emotions get the best of Fjall, and a royal betrayal leads to bloodshed. Here's a quick synopsis from future Alyssa on the episode. In episode 101, Jaskier is saved from a Temerian army camp by the Scoia'tael. In the midst of the battle, a mysterious elven storyteller whisks him away to tell him the story of the Seven. We are introduced to Éile, a warrior-turned-bard from the Raven clan, and Fjall Stoneheart, an exiled royal protector from the Dog clan, who meet in a jail cell in a village at the edge of the world. Meanwhile, Princess Merwin of Zintrea, continually belittled by her brother the king, stages a coup against the 3 elven monarchies with Chief Sage Balor and High Commander Eredin, who each have their own agendas for achieving power on the continent. Despite Merwin's active role, Balor and Eredin keep her as a puppet empress and unite the now leaderless kingdoms under their golden empire. They raise monoliths in hope of reaching and conquering other worlds for their own prosperity. When Éile and Fjall learn of Merwin's betrayal, they seek out Skian of the Ghost Tribe for help on their quest to assassinate the Empress. So now that we've got a quick recap on what has happened in the episode, I'd love to hear some of your overall thoughts on the episode as a whole. So things like the story or the plot, production, casting, and what was like a highlight from the episode for you and a low light for the episode for you guys.
The highlights, I think, the look of the thing, it was amazing. The costumes are absolutely sublime. I just couldn't fault it. It was incredible. Iceland doing its usual magic, just looking incredible. And I hadn't seen it used quite as well as this since there was a film, Beowulf and Grendel, like a few years ago, which was just incredible for the same thing, featuring all the black sands and all the rest of it, and the little, the local breed of horses and stuff that we saw those again. It was glorious. It's a real natural fantasy setting, so it's great to see it used as well as it was there. But certainly the costume side of things was astonishing. I thought particularly Isle's costume was out of this world. That whole thing, it fitted in so well with the elves. That they're sometimes described as wearing clothing that's sort of patterned out of leaf shapes and stuff, but this one was slightly different. She has sort of muted colours on the outside, but the linings of them all were lots of amazing forest colours coming out there.
Yeah.
And just looks incredible. But all of the swords and the armour and everything, it was, I hated the swords, but they had some strange crooked swords which I just couldn't see how they would work. They would just constantly catch on things. But yeah, that side of things was immense. Yeah, and the casting as well. All the actors were strong.
Yeah.
It wasn't a case of there was no one you were looking at and thinking, oh, they're letting the side down a bit, or they're not committing. Everyone gave it their all, and there was just a great, charismatic group of people. And obviously, got Michelle Yeoh in there. You're kind of spoiled already, but the others definitely lived up to it, and quite a few of them I hadn't seen in anything before, and they all stood out. So, no one was just making up the numbers. The only thing I felt we missed out on in episode 1 was there was insufficient Meldoff. She kind of steals the show, really.
Yeah.
The whole thing, just amazing.
I loved her. I think I said this in my pre-release review as well.
You did, yeah. I knew what you meant when I'd seen it.
She was one of my favorite characters. I just adored Meldorf as a character. I thought she was fantastic. Yeah, it would be great to have had more of her, I think, throughout the show.
Even Michelle got to bring the funny in this one, though.
Yeah.
There was that lovely little line about, Fjall with his axe.
Oh, my God.
It's like, he's the one with the axe. Doesn't seem to know how to use it, though. That was quite nice and flippant.
So good. She's amazing. They're all so amazing. They were definitely my two standouts. Two of my standouts, I think, from the series.
I would say the highlights were the costumes. They were fantastic, especially the royal costumes. They were just super elegant. And then the landscapes of everything. But Iceland was fantastic. It supported the characters and their backstories, which also helps a lot. The actors, fantastic. They really, really were charismatic. They really dove into their roles, and there wasn't any hint of hesitation. There was 100% commitment to it.
I think for me, for this episode, some of the highlights were the landscapes, the overall scenery, Merwin's costumes throughout not just this episode, but all the series, just their couture, their actual runway couture pieces. And I was like, oh my God, I really hope that this is an indication of what we might get for Thanedd. So I have my fingers crossed that we'll get luxury couture dresses for Thanedd. Aside from that, casting, I think, as we all have said, was really spot on. The music and Sophia Brown's voice is such a standout and, will carry us throughout the show. But the first time we get to experience it here in that intimate setting in a tavern, I was just enthralled by not only her voice, but also by the content of the song, which I thought was fantastic. The one-liners for me throughout the show in general, protecting not fucking being too long for Dog Clan Cock, I was like, oh my God. Aridin doesn't know his ass from his elbow and he couldn't organize a ride in a brothel. That's an amazing insult. I think one of the lowlights or the things that I was, a little bit less convinced of, when we get toward the end of the episode, the monster design, I think, for Balor's Beast was something that I was kind of on the fence on. It's kind of that weird place in which it doesn't look like it fits into the world because it almost looks a little too bionic. But I feel like that's also the point, is that it came from a different world. So I kind of go back and forth on whether or not I like it for The Witcher or not.
Well, at this point, all the monsters came from a different world. And having something that's so out of the ordinary as the first monster into the world, you're kind of like, okay, fair enough, because it's not something you're used to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the issue really was, it was very much like the Chernobog in season 2 as far as that's concerned. I know what you mean. We're used to things being sort of wriggly and grungy and killable by a witcher, and these things seem a little big somehow. So this one, you think, well, how are you going to fight this? It's enormous, and it's just wiped out 3 whole clans, 2 that we have feelings for, and 1 which just seem to be making up the numbers, the poor guys. They really are the forgotten house in Harry Potter sort of thing, aren't they?
R.I.P. Serpent Clan.
Yeah. Worst job in the world.
Yeah. I mean, it was really lovely to, at least have the grandeur of that scene with them. And this is something we could certainly talk later, but I feel like having a monster that was so overpowered was almost like that reminder of how insignificant we are in the grand scheme of things. they're about to sign a treaty that's going to impact the lives of everyone on the continent, and then suddenly, poof, red mist. They're all gone. And I feel like that's a really interesting theme to explore, insignificance or significance. I think we can certainly get to that when we talk about all of our characters and the impact that they will have across the series. I guess on that note, now that we've gone through and spoken about what stood out to us about this episode, some of the highlights and lowlights, I'd love to get into our discussion. As I said, this is going to be a slightly different conversation than a scene-by-scene one, but I'm really looking forward to it nonetheless. I'd love to start off with this opening question. What do we learn about the current state of affairs from the opening scene and the framing narrative with Jaskier and Shen-Che, and how do they help ease the viewer from the main series into Blood Origin?
They set it up as the chaotic nature of the regular Witcher show, and it kind of transitions you into, here's a backstory. Jaskier the scribe, and I'm terrible at all these names.
I'm going to guess Shen-Che?
Let's go with that. That's probably the best we could get.
I don't think they actually say it in the show, to be fair to all of us. They've only said it in interviews.
Okay. Her being the narrator, Jaskier being the scribe. I found it similar to the story of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, where Tolkien told the story to his son. And it was the son who made it famous. On the second viewing, I thought it was Nilfgaard doing their usual Nilfgaardian chaoticness. The Scourtel helping Jaskier out of the predicament, as he usually goes into, because he always needs somebody to save him. I thought that was kind of interesting. He made enough friends with the elves for the elves to have his back, which I thought was pretty neat.
Yeah, it was a bit discombobulating because it starts off with the camera upside down.
I loved that.
Kind of throws you a little bit, but I think that's to give you a sense of the confusion of how Jaskier's waking up, because he wasn't strung up by his ankles or anything. It wasn't a point of view thing at all. It was just it started that way, I think, just to throw you off, and then it sort of flips into focus, and it's obviously all chaos and fire and blood and horror at night, and you recognise it's sort of Northern Kingdoms type helmets, and then they helpfully tell you it's Temeria that's involved, so that's good, because I wasn't 100% sure to begin with whether it was looking back a bit or looking forward. It's and again being name checked for the Scourtel, but it was interesting, the time freeze and everything. Obviously, we haven't seen anything like that in the show yet, but we do know this from the books. There's a couple of 2 or 3 characters who seem to have the ability to shift through time and mess about like this. So I'm pretty sure that this character actually shows up slightly differently later on in this particular show. We'll see if as time goes by whether I'm right about that or not. One of the things that was really interesting, though, and certainly ties in with the main series, the way Joey Batey plays Jaskier is that he's being teased and being offered something that he'd be interested in. This idea of you can be the one that brings this song to people, and it's like he can't resist that. The whole business of following Geralt to the edge of the world and all the rest of it. He's done all this before. We know this. He'll do anything for it to pick up a new song. So he was hooked well and truly. What really grabbed me was the loot that was on the table.
Yeah.
Because at this point, Jaskier doesn't have his loot, so we know it's going to be probably concurrent with what's been going on at the end of season 2, where he had lost his loot. It was broken on the dockside.
I believe it's the same loot, actually.
That's what I was thinking, and that's really odd, as to how they're going to tie that all together, as to how that goes round full circle again. Because the way they've done it in the show is that it's Filavandrel who gives the loot to Jaskier, whereas obviously in the books it was the character Teruviel who broke his originally. So it's quite odd that such a significant elf will later hand it to him. But it's odd that it's been broken now. They could have somehow kept the thing going around, that it actually goes back the other way. That would have been fascinating. A loot that was never really created. But they've chosen with this way. But it was odd. You've also, you'll have noticed that the flowers that were growing in the area that they were in, that those were the flowers we know that only grow where the elder blood has been spilt. So I would imagine this particular setting will feature somewhere else, either in our current story or another standalone feature.
Yeah. Well, we do know that they've already shared or revealed the very first episode title for season 3. It's going to be Sherwed. So maybe we were in Sherwed. I don't know. I guess we're going to find out. But yeah, there's I think it is kind of nice to have a framing narrative to an extent. And it was definitely an interesting one to have Jaskier. I think we always knew he was going to be part of this story, but to have it be that Scoia'tael versus the Temerians, and having Mini Driver's narrator come in as well. I was always curious about how this version of Jaskier is going to help carry the show between seasons 2 and seasons 3. Joey Beatty has been on record as saying that this specific battle in Blood Origin takes place about 6 months before season 3 begins. So we know that he was working with the Scoia'tael toward the end, and just helping Elven refugees. I'd love to see how this is going to push into Dijkstra saying he wants to speak to the Bard at the end of season 2, for example, and what I guess he's been up to in between seasons, because it feels like he's going to be a key player moving forward into season 3. I'm curious if this song that he's working on, the story that he gets from the narrator, is going to be a factor into season 3 as well and beyond, if this continues to support the main show in that way.
Yeah, I mean, because that comes across as almost like a structural issue that, why would the elves have forgotten this song? Why do they need to have it reborn again? Because we're obviously variously told that from a human perspective, elves seem to be almost immortal, whereas Sapkowski rather playfully tells us one character has seen the smokes of Samhain over 600 times. If only we knew how often Samhain smoked, we'd have some idea of how exactly long that might actually be.
Yeah.
But, it's certainly intriguing, as to why this song has somehow disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
That he's gonna bring it up. So they should really have to recognise it. And if the Scoia'tael are already out fighting, seems like they've already had the rallying cry. So it's strange. So it might be that there's another subversion in place about how this song's going to be used. It might actually inspire the humans against Nilfgaard, for all I know. It's an oddity. So we'll see where they go with it.
Yeah, interesting.
It also depends on how many elves of such old age are left, because elves are pretty much on the verge of extinction at this point, especially not having any young ones left. A lot of things of history are lost to time. That doesn't excuse them whether or not they're quote-unquote immortal or not, because most generations, whether they be elves, dwarves, humans, tend to be overwhelmed and go towards the new and progressive and tend to forget traditional things.
Yeah, and I think that leads very nicely into the second question, which is actually one that Softie shared. How is the elven architecture and aesthetic realized between Blood Origin and the main adaptation? And then beyond that, how do you guys think it compares to Sapkowski's portrayal of the early elven civilizations that are portrayed in the books?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the bit that really caught the eye was the really geometrical shapes and things of the buildings in. It doesn't matter what we call it, really. This was something, incidentally, we don't have to worry about pronunciation, because they clearly didn't have a production meeting and decide how they're going to pronounce Zintria. Is it Zintria? Zintrea? You hear it 3 different ways throughout the show. I checked that one out.
It's the curse of the Witcher.
Yeah. So, however it is, but it's that architectural style was the same one they use for the buildings at Aretusa, and when Yennefer and Fringilla are wandering through the woods, sort of when they were captured by the elves, they also see a building very like that and say, "Oh, it's just like the buildings at Aretusa, isn't it?" Which was really helpful of them, because we wouldn't have picked that up otherwise.
Yeah.
So that's all that. There's a bit of it that worries me, though, in that it's nothing like Sapkowski's description of elven architecture. He really does describe it as literally as being like asparagus spears. He talks about these tall, thin spires with the minarets on the top and all the rest of it, and great big, sweeping bridges between the buildings and things. So he's really written it as you'd expect him to, as the way sort of Rodney Matthews album covers from the 70s and 80s and stuff. This was the classic view of what elven architecture would look like, and that's Sapkowski's whole thing. It's like he'll present you with something that you're familiar with, so you think, "Oh, I know this. I know all about elves. I know them from Tolkien. Yeah, they're tall and fair and wonderful," and that throws you off your game. That when he subverts it in some way. So this was odd. This architecture is nothing like it, but it works in the Netflix version. That that at least they've been consistent throughout. So at least we know it's like, well, this is their understanding of elven architecture. We didn't get that slightly odd feeling we got, because when we're in Aretusa, for instance, from the outside it's got that very geometric square sort of shapes and what have you, but inside it was full of Norman arches and sort of Moorish friezwork and stuff. It was like a real strange mixture of styles on the inside. So it was almost like from the outside it looks like this kind of a TARDIS thing going on, that it looks very square from the outside, but inside it's full of all kind of different details. But they were really consistent. The internal layout and things actually matched the external. Although I think if I lived as long as an elf, I'd do something about those squeaky doors. I don't know if Ben would agree on that, because they seem to be very noisy, and quite why you'd settle for a Billy bookcase when you've got the wealth of an entire empire on your side. That seems odd. But yeah, they're the main thing that the main difference from the books that caught me, though, was that they had them with the great big fortifications. So the big city walls and everything. And that's odd, because that really is at variance with actually how it's written. That in The Edge of the World, when Filavandrel is talking about how the elves were driven off their land and stuff, they weren't set up to fight. That with their whole relationship with the land was the one that, it was like a love affair, that the land served up the bounty for them. And one of the things that he was sort of highlighting is the way the world has changed, is the land isn't behaving the same way that it used to, that since man has sort of started tearing up the earth and raping it, pulling all of its resources out of it and things, that it's no longer able to serve the elves. So this idea that Zintrea would be this massive city, with thousands of people in it, that means that you'd have to have, fixed agriculture and things. And in the books, they hadn't known how to tame the land in that way, and that they had their Sylvan was to steal seeds, and the knowledge of how to do the 3-field system and things, that was the way they'd set it up.
Right.
Whereas this is different. So I went back and in preparation I watched Nightmare of the Wolf and season 1 and season 2 again, just to see actually how they've done it. I just wanted to see. And you've actually got the more sort of airy fairy elven architecture showing in Nightmare of the Wolf. They didn't go for the same design in there. But in that one, when they dealt with the business with the Sylvan, what we had in there is he was just straight up stealing food. There was no mention of the knowledge of agriculture and things. So within the Netflix Witcherverse, it actually makes sense the way that they've done it. So that's fine. They'll just have to explain how the elves were shoved out of their cities. But it ties in more. It kind of makes sense where they're laying it on with layers. That we know from Yarp and Zegrin in the books, for instance, that dwarves are saying, yeah, it's nice for the elves to be upset about the humans, but we've got long memories, and you guys did this to us, and when it was your turn, you guys turned up in your white ships and attacked us. So it's all very well you getting upset now about the humans trying to drive you out of your lands, but you did it to us years ago. So this idea that maybe dwarven cities were turned into elven cities and then become human cities, it kind of works nicely for them, and it makes sense in their own version of the universe. But I just have to note it's not the same. It's very different.
When it comes to the shows, movies, like Nightmare of the Wolf, the Witcher show, Blood Origin, they all have their cinematic changes, which is always bound to happen when it comes to the books. Like Aretusa to the original Elven architecture, their humanoid changes to it. It's similar to history as a whole. You have the original structure, somebody else takes it over, they add their stuff to it, and then somebody else takes it over. So it's years and years and years and years of several different cultures that morph it, kind of similar to like a melting pot.
I imagine that there's also a very tangible experience of that as you're contracting on people's houses, and it's just like extensions and renovations, and you're digging through that as you're making repairs.
Some of it's more subtle, some of it's more obvious, like, oh, yeah, yep. Just looking at it, it's something added. But you can always see the bare bones of it, always see what's original. Also somewhat gets you in a mindset, nostalgic mindset. It's like, how can you be nostalgic for a world you never really knew? Only what your mind can pick up and take in from what you're seeing and reading or experiencing of what's left. Being in the world of The Witcher, what you're seeing in the show is what's left that survived that 1,200 years.
Yeah, the timeline is incredibly interesting because we're continuing to kind of push markers past the point of the prequel. We have the Witcher main series, of course, and then 1,200 years before that, we have Blood Origin. we have 1,000-year war, and then an X amount of time that Solrith, Merwin's heroine, arrived, her reign, and then her arrival. So we're potentially looking at another 1,000 years of when the golden age of elves, as they said, started, and then the 1,000-year war, and then Blood Origin, and then another, 1,200 years until the world that we know in The Witcher. When we start looking at the architecture, I find that incredibly interesting, partially for the reasons that you mentioned, Softie. Like, we have an entire city, which looks pretty mapped to all of the overviews we've seen of Sintra, just instead of the, throne room that we see in Blood Origin. I think it's a monolith that's, like, smack in the middle of Sintra, if I remember correctly. It is really interesting to see, like, the way that foundation has been, and you can kind of imagine Calanthe's throne room where Merwin's is. But yeah, it was definitely unexpected. I think the overall aesthetic, how kind of like clean and sci-fi it was. But I guess when you think about things like the pyramids of Giza and what those must have looked like before they, have crumbled over the last 2,000 years, maybe it would be much the same.
It's just interesting because the choice is a design that you're used to seeing sort of poking through the foliage, the jungle sort of treetops and stuff.
Yeah.
It's got that real sort of Central America or Brazilian rainforests kind of vibe going on for it.
Yeah, and to me it also evokes like a certain sci-fi aspect or aesthetic. Like, there are parts of it, I think especially like the hallways and the overall shape of the tower and everything that's there, that almost to me reminds me of certain hallway scenes in Star Wars. So I feel like that was something that came to mind for me, like with how smooth everything was. That it almost teetered on that edge of science fiction.
Yeah, they were nice and light and nice and broad for fighting scenes as well. That was nicely done.
Yeah, so very practical use too.
I mean, obviously the whole business of switching across to the cities and things, it's the biggest change there is obviously Sapkowski was using the elves and their closeness to the land and stuff to actually investigate the whole thing of colonization and how people get driven out of their balance with nature and all the rest of it, and how their whole lives can change.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most troubling thing for me with it all, though, is actually aesthetically was the beards. For a man who sports one himself, I was a bit put off, because the elves definitely used the hirsute as an insult in the books. Complaining about how they offset themselves against humans, about our hairiness is one of the things that they dislike about us. So that was quite interesting to have lost that. But it's also just that it's almost like these elves, the way they were presented in this, are absolutely identical to humans, except for the pointy ears. That's the only difference. They're just as chaotic. There's nothing noble about them. Originally when we meet them, it's like there's been no music on this island for years, and you think, wow, that's not very Elven. These guys are always singing under the stars. This is interesting. It's very, very different. But certainly for the designs, I thought one thing that really caught my eye with this was particularly with Queen Merwin again was the amazing eye makeup that they were using, which straight away you're just hearing Yennefer explaining it to Ciri about all the elves knew what they were doing when they created eye makeup. This is the real deal, and her eyes are just incredible. That whole makeup and things, the full slashes and things, she just looked incredible. And I loved the little the pointy ear caps, the little golden caps people wear as jewelry. That's a great idea.
Yeah,
never seen that
cute.
Before.
Yeah, they were definitely very, very cute and stood out. And I think like some of that grandeur is part of this golden era, or this declined golden era that we're seeing in Blood Origin, which I think is incredibly interesting. And I guess to like bring it back around to almost that human experience that you had mentioned as well, Softie. As we look toward our main characters, what is the difference, do you guys think, between the way that the two of them have coped with the loss of their families and their status?
Well, one was Fjall was forced out, where Éile did it by choice, which allowed them to cope a lot better. Fjall was more down in the dumps when you kind of see him in the jail, where Éile was kind of just going about her own business because that's what she chose. And then when her sister shows up, Fjall is a very emotional individual. Éile is as well. He didn't have a choice whether he wanted to come back or not. He did a little bit towards the end when they were trying to collect him to come back again. And he burning that bridge kind of holds a grudge. Éile had the option of it, even though she chose to leave, and decided not to burn that bridge. And ultimately their choices were made for them.
It was interesting that they were both driven by shame initially. That we don't know the specifics of it at this point in the series, but Aile's running from something in her past. She's ashamed of something she's done. She doesn't want to be part of that world anymore. Whereas Fjall's ashamed of himself. It's flat out, he's let himself down, is how he feels. He's not worthy of honor. I mean, even, here, bitter enemies, these two clans, the Ravens and the Dogs, and a member of the Raven clan insults him, and he actually just lets it go. That's how low he's fallen, that his pride doesn't even let him rise against that. He's actually prepared to take an insult, which I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have done before then. That would have been the last thing he would have done. But, he's so disgusted with himself and how he's let himself down and things that he's just prepared to drift into. He's basically looks like he's on a bit of a spiral. He's trying to look for death, so he's just hiring himself out as a sellsword and just losing himself in debauchery, and it's just let himself go completely. And that shows that he's quite sluggish in the fights to begin with and stuff. He's still finding himself again.
He's very Geralt-like in a lot of aspects. Yeah. He's even throwing fucks out there.
He does have a line at some point in the series in which he's like, fuck destiny. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's where we're at. Mm-hmm. There was a parallel there, which is when I started piecing things together when I was watching the show. I do agree with you, Ben. I do feel that the way that they left their clans has a really strong impact on how they were affected by the loss of their families when they heard the news, especially. She left for, music. She left for art. She left to become a bard. And as soon as that death happens, she turns away from that, from what she has devoted her life to, and shuns music, and even says that throughout the episode, like, I don't go by the lark anymore. My sister is dead. And she just kind of turns back to that, the way of the knife and the sword and the blade. Whereas with Fjall, of course, we spoke about his situation is also of his own doing. Like, he knew this was a bad idea. He even said as much to Merwin when she tried to seduce him again. And he was like, this is a terrible idea. Let's do it. So it's kind of just like, I think that's on you, bud. We got a really strong glimpse into how the Dog Clan is run, the prestige, how heavily involved they are in the day-to-day of the monarchy within Centrea. So that was a long ways for him to fall. I senses as much. She's like, you've been on the clan teat for too long. You can't even figure out how to get yourself some coin. Like, come on. And he's still figuring out his way in the world. So we're certainly finding him fresh in his, I don't know if I would say grief.
It's more self-pity.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. So we're certainly seeing him while he's still processing the loss of his family, his lover, and his clan.
It's very much going to The Last Airbender. When you hit your lowest point, you're open to the greatest change.
Yeah.
Enemies become allies, and you go from a lark to a warrior again. Mm-hmm. It's the way the Witcher world works.
Yeah. And the hero's journey as well. Like, we've hit that point of no return toward the middle of episode 1. They're being set off on their quest. I think it sets them up very well in the loss of their clans, the loss of their status, and how they're going to redeem themselves and the world. Before we continue our discussion, we're going to hand it over to Larson Witcherflix for recent news on the Netflix show. When we come back, Ben, Softie, and I will continue our discussion of Ballads, Brawlers, and Bloodied Blades.
Hey, it's Lars from Witcherflix, and this is Tidings from Toussaint. Welcome back, everybody, and Happy New Year! After the release of the Witcher spin-off miniseries Blood Origin on December 25th, 2023 will be the year that will see the release of Season 3 of the Witcher main show. It will be an adaptation of the second book in the main saga, Time of Contempt, and at the same time, the final season of Henry Cavill as Geralt. He will be replaced by Liam Hemsworth in Season 4 that is already confirmed. How long we have to wait for Season 3, we don't really know at the moment. Netflix revealed back in September that the new season will see its release this summer, but when exactly is not known. In an interview with Collider, showrunner Lauren Hissrich talked about the possibility of splitting up Season 3 into 2 parts. The reason for this would be the time-consuming work on the special effects. She adds that she thinks that the post-production for Season 3 will take at least 7 more months. Splitting up a season of television due to VFX work was prominently done last year with Season 4 of Stranger Things, so this is definitely not unheard of. So what exactly does this mean? According to this, we can expect new episodes of The Witcher in August at the earliest. In an interview with IGN, Lauren Hissrich talked about The Witcher show's future with Liam Hemsworth as Geralt of Rivia. She said, "What I'm excited about is that we are allowing this franchise to continue growing, and that we get new energy and chemistry that we haven't discovered yet. And to me that's part of the fun of television. You don't know where exactly the adventure is going to end. So it's something I'm really excited about." In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Lauren also talked about giving Henry Cavill a heroic send-off. She said, "Geralt's big turn is about giving up neutrality and doing anything that he has to do to get Ciri. And to me it's the most heroic send-off that we could have, even though it wasn't written to be that. Geralt has a new mission in mind when we come back to him in Season 4. He's a slightly different Geralt than we expected." Lauren also talked about Season 3 as a whole and as an adaptation of Time of Contempt. What is so interesting is that Season 3, to me, is the closest thing that we've done as a one-to-one adaptation of the books. Obviously we can't do every page, but Time of Contempt gave us so many big action events, plot points, defining character moments, huge reveals of a big bad. There's so much to do that we are able to stick really, really close with the books. On social media, Lauren also talked about another recasting that, as reported a few months ago, will already take place in Season 3. Sam Wolf will be replacing Chris Fulton as the rogue mage Rhys. As expected, scheduling conflicts are the reason for this change. This is what Lauren said. "Chris Fulton was amazing and we are so sad, as was he, that the dates we needed him for didn't align with the movie he was shooting. Sam Wolf had huge shoes to fill, but don't worry, Rhys is just as scary in Season 3. In another interview with Collider, showrunner Lauren Hissrich looked into the future and talked about a possible endpoint of The Witcher main show. She said, "It has been my goal with my executives at Netflix to always have an endpoint in mind because to me, when you start just writing stories without knowing where they're going, you can get lost. And what I think is so interesting about what we have figured out, to answer your question in 2 ways, yes, I absolutely know where the series is going to end. I know what season it's going to end. I know how it's going to end, which is very, very exciting. Last but not least, thanks to a report by Redanian Intelligence, we have learned about a new book character that will make an appearance in Season 3 of The Witcher. It is the legendary Falka. She is a historical figure in the books who lived about 120 years before the Witcher main saga. She became notorious for starting a bloody rebellion against her own father King Vridang of Redania to win back the throne that Falka thought was rightfully hers. Falka will be played by British actress Hiftu Kazim, who appeared in productions like 10% and Killing Eve before. Redanian Intelligence reports that she had been involved in the shooting in Morocco back in July 2022, where she filmed with Freya Allen. This would hint at Ciri having more visions. These will be some interesting scenes. Anyway guys, that's it for me for today. I hope the new year brings you all happiness, good health, and a lot of great moments in the world of The Witcher. We talk again in the next episode of Breakfast in Beauclair. Until then, thanks again for listening and good luck on the path.
Hey everyone, welcome back from the break. When we left off, Ben, Softie, and I had discussed our overall highlights and lowlights, the series' framing narrative, and how the show establishes the world and stakes in Episode 1. As a follow-up to that, Softie, one of the questions that you had was specifically about the monoliths. You mentioned that we're introduced to the monoliths and told their origin, although crucially not their original purpose, from the dwarves. And I guess the follow-up question is then, how might this history impact viewers' understanding of the monoliths as they're watching both the main series as well as Blood Origin? And how do you think this additional history is going to impact the plot of the main series?
Yeah, this is huge, the changes they brought about here. We had Istred and Geralt fumbling around with their lone brain cell in the bottom of that canyon, trying to work out what was going on. And according to Istred, the prevailing theory had been this ludicrous one that the the monoliths were leftover impact points from the conjunction of the spheres, which suggests like a giant game of, intergalactic conkers of planets being whacked into each other. There'd be no survivors there. This is a terrible theory. I don't know who came up with it and why anyone went along with it. But Istrid's one now, of course, is they're conduits to allow you to communicate. We're obviously finding out something very, very different now, that their original shape and everything is different about them. That the ones that we've got used to is the later version of them, where they look like they're a giant flint that's been napped by monstrous hands. They've just flaked off all the bits around it. Whereas these are amazingly geometric and what have you. And we learn that they were actually buried in the ground by the dwarves, and the elves have been raising them up to do something with them. And this is the only way it really ties in with the actual the writing. Is that Yennefer explains to another character about how these lines of power are set up. That if you want to draw on magic and things, that this is the best way of doing it. As we're saying with the Last Airbender, pulling it from the air is quite hard to do. As Korra found, for instance. But that it's easier to pull it from water or from the earth, and that lines of power have already been discovered, and they've been marked by the older races who've raised stones on them. And the way they're described in the books is, specifically as a cromlech, and he even describes it as being, that there's a series of smaller stones and this great stone laid on it. And that's when monolith is first mentioned in the books, is that Yennefer puts her hand on the monolith. And I am sure Bo can confirm this, but I'm pretty sure that this is probably just a mistranslation, that there's probably a word in Polish which conveys the idea that this is the master stone, because a cromlech is a collection of stones. It's not a monolith. A monolith literally means a single stone. And this is not a single stone. So monolith is the wrong word to have used. So it's quite odd that it might have been a mistranslation that's ended up putting monoliths into the whole series, and that wasn't the right word. That would be hilarious. But, they've gone with it anyway.
Yeah, we're doubling down. Like, this has already been multiple seasons of television, plus spin-off series, plus movies. We're going with the monoliths. That is super interesting.
We do go to another place where there are stones as well, but in there again they're described as menhirs and dolmens, and also cromlech again is the word that's used. So again, these are very much like the stones that we see littering across northern France and all across the British Isles, that these collection of stones, not single standing stones, although menhirs are single standing stones quite often. But again, monolith was used in that context as well to describe the avenue of stones that they see there. So two Elven areas that we see have got these similar stones in them. So it's a perfectly legitimate thing to have pulled from the stories to say, well, how would this have worked?
Yeah.
So I totally get why they've done it. And I think what they've done here with the origins for them as being from the dwarves is absolutely fascinating and has changed my whole opinion of monoliths. I don't hate them nearly as much as I did before.
There's a pretty strong camp of people that monoliths is a no-go word. That is a cursed word. That's so interesting. I've not pieced it together that way myself. I am so curious, and I do want to follow up if this was a mistranslation into English. That is so interesting, and I will find out. I'm making a mental note to find out. And if I do have any insight, I will put it right here. Hey guys, so I did get a chance to ask about the original Polish here. According to Bolo from Poland, the name monolith does appear, but it's common to not repeat the same word over and over again, contrary to what you might think after all the, quote, pirouettes in The Witcher. The description of said stone is, quote, on the top of the hill, there was a huge stone supported by a few smaller ones. As Bolo says, it's not a monolith like Washington, D.C. in size or shape, not even menhir size as far as I can read into this, especially since it's explicitly stated to not be smooth, not 2 sentences after. It looks like it's more of a classic trope of the ley lines intersection since it's there since forgotten times rather than since the conjunction. So this information has sparked some discussion in the Hansa Discord with pictures about how the stones in Blood of Elves have been interpreted around the world by readers of different translations. You can find that in the Hansa Discord under the book discussion #NoSpoilers channel. Thank you so much, Bolo, for your insight, and we're going to get back to the episode.
Brilliant.
Well, I was going to say the Witcher world is so elaborate, and we're going so far back in time. You could tell Blood Origin, the monoliths, they're so symmetrical. And when it comes to the Witcher show, they've deteriorated, whether that be from monsters coming through or just erosion, age, withering it away. Who knows? There could be pieces lying around of the monolith. You have smaller fragments. According to Blood Origin, the dwarves had them buried, so they were protected. So if they're buried, you're not going to be aged.
Mm-hmm.
Not really. So now that the elves putting them out in the open, they get the wear and tear of nature, of people.
Because we learned a lot about them in this first episode. You know, the idea that they've raised 5 of them in the north and 2 in the south already. And this seems to be tying in with what we've already found from the books about this idea that these stones are raised to actually focus power. Because they're saying, have we got enough to actually open a portal? That's what they want to do, to make a permanent portal.
For a legion, that's massive.
And definitely, you know, there's a later episode where we learn what the dwarves were doing with them, and that's fascinating. That's a huge plot point, you know, which I'm not going to cover here. They'll definitely have to raise it in one of the other ones. But also in the 4th episode, we actually see something happen to one of the monoliths, which suggests it's not just time that's affected them. So that'll be interesting to see that come together as well.
Yeah. This is something that was conceived for the show. I don't think it was as harped on in the books, but thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think without the additional context or your interpretation of what this could have meant in Sapkowski's writing and how it could have been adapted, it does make a lot more sense. But I think without that, when we all kind of made the assumption that this was all rather made up, it was kind of interesting to imagine how all of this is going to play out and intertwine, because we know we've doubled and tripled, quadrupled down on this concept.
And I think it was a natural thing as well, wasn't it? Because whenever you get something that's been inserted into the lore, you know, and other things have fallen by the wayside, it's like, oh, right, so you can make time for the bloody monoliths, you know, but you've cut this out and you've cut that out, you know, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
Whereas this, they're actually providing something, you know, quite solid with it, because, you know, crucially, Sapkowski wasn't a world builder. That's not what he was about. So he didn't bother with a map and things. Why should I? It's not about that. You know, he's trying to show you that all these great high fantasy concepts and things, underneath it, there's people, and people are what matters, and it's the relationships between people that's important. So it's really subverted the whole genre as far as the way he's presenting it there. And the great thing is, you know, the conjunction of the spheres, it just throws it about. There's no explanation for it at all, you know, or no satisfactory one, you know, that none of the people who are explaining it are entirely trustworthy. But, you know, there's no straight witnesses in it. He doesn't, although he writes in the third person, he never uses the authorial voice to tell us what's going on unless he absolutely has to step in. So, you know, very occasionally he does it. You know, like if all the characters are lying and things, he has to let us know, you know, in case we can't work it out for ourselves. Like, don't listen to any of these guys, you know.
Yeah. It is sometimes like a story within a story within a story that lets us know that one of them was a lie along the way,
Yes.
which is, you know, really fun. I think a really fun way to go about it.
But yeah, he gave them nothing to go on, did he? So, you know, the fact that they had to come up with an origin story for the, you know, it's fair enough. If you're going to cover the conjunction of the spheres, you've got to come up with something. And this is as good as any.
Absolutely. I think as we continue to look at the plot, the monoliths play such a huge role in the betrayal of the monarchies. The monoliths are really at the center of Ballers, who's the chief sage of Zintria, of his plan for effectively world domination. He is trying to take over the continent, become its emperor, and the monoliths and the character of Sindril, his discoveries play a huge role in that. There are a few other characters that have fallen in line into alliance with Balor as well. We have Eredin, who is the general of the Cintrian armies, and Merwin, who is the princess who later becomes empress. We first meet Merwin and all of Zintria and the Dog Clan as they're kind of fighting in the streets of the town. And she kills someone then, and she is absolutely shaking. And by the end of the episode, she kills Fjall's sister by slicing her throat. So I think the question that I wanted to pose to you guys as I watched it was, what do you believe has changed for Merwin between her first kill and her second? And do you believe that Eredin, Balor, and Merwin's betrayal of the Three Kingdoms was justified?
The main difference between her first kill and her betrayal of her clan, the first one was a lot more into self-defense rather than having a real motivation. Like taking your first life, it always shakes you up. You're always going through the emotions. You're questioning yourself, you become irrational.
I hope this isn't from personal experience, Ben.
No. No. When it comes to the second one, she has her ideals that motivate her. I always take this from Assassin's Creed, but ideals easily give way to dogma, and dogma becomes fanaticism.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to be able to make her own choices, do her own passions, but everything at this point, whatever decision she makes, is a means to an end. She focuses on her end goal. Anything in between is worth it. It's not a matter of price, it's a matter of cost.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't value anything other than what she wants to achieve. All the villains in this show, they want their power, whatever that power may be, whether that be to become emperor, to be able to make your own choices. Everything in the way of that is expendable.
The ends justify the means, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the first kill for Merwin was quite interesting because we didn't see it.
Mm.
She gets given a knife and bundled into an alleyway, while the other two, her brother and her protector, are busy beating the crap out of people.
It just says assassins, Brawlers, assassins.
I think there's obviously a lot of memeing potential there with the king's golden armor, because on the back he's got this circle part on it, which unfortunately makes him just look like C-3PO. So that's going to happen. It's inevitable. But back to Merwin, when they obviously find her in the, she's sort of, they're looking around, they've killed everyone, and she's there. There's like a lone body in the alleyway with her, and she's shaking with blood all in her hands and this bloody knife. And the interesting thing is there's no sign of a weapon with this person, so she might have just knifed some poor carpet seller in this alleyway for all we know. It's quite strange, but it's not explored in any way. I don't think we're supposed to be seeing the beginning of a murderer here. But for the second one, she's not waiting to be threatened. She's starting to see which way the cookie's crumbling, and it's like, well, this person could go on to be a threat to me. And she's obsessed with this historical figure, the original founder of Elvendom, and she thinks that they just went wrong when they started squabbling and things, that they really just one single point of control, and obviously that should be her. So that makes sense from her perspective. But I think the most interesting one's probably Ballard, because his whole business is he doesn't feel anyone will ever accept him because he's lowborn. So this is quite odd. He's not decided to lead a popular uprising and be the champion of the lowborn. He's not doing it that way at all. He's gone the other way, which is like, no, I want to be the boss. And he's just had to look around and see who would support him, and he feels that the clans won't, because they're wedded to the aristocracy. The kings, the royal houses, that they all look down on him. They're not going to accept him as their ruler because he's not of royal blood. Mm-hmm. So who else is left? Well, the other branch of it all is the military. And the military would be terrified if peace comes, because their numbers will be cut down automatically. The only reason that they're so powerful and so in control is that they need this enormous army to have continue this three-way fight. Now, the whole peace treaty doesn't make a lot of sense. The idea that there's a three-way fight going on and two of you are going to get joined together by marriage, and the other guy, well, we've given you a mine. I'm sure that we won't, now we're joined together, we won't just gang up and take the mine back off you, but apparently everyone's going to sign anyway. So it's quite a strange treaty, that one.
Yeah, that didn't make a complete sense, though.
Yeah, it's odd.
It's certainly well-intentioned on her brother's part.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, he's right. They have to stop the fighting. It's just, the only way you could sustain that kind of draw on, resources and things, because this is the thing, the crops are failing regularly now, so they can't feed themselves properly. So they need to do something. And at the moment, they've got the huge armies to fight each other. But if you've got a huge army and you do actually still need to produce resources, you can also choose to be complete dicks and attack someone else and steal all their food and enslave their populations and stuff. And it just so happens that someone's opened a portal and it's like, hey, maybe we could do it that way. Let's find another world and just take their shit. Great. That's the plan they're going with. But it's an interesting one that, one of them is got this idea of hope that maybe we could all live in peace together and we could turn things around. And the others are like, no, let's get worse. We'll try it that way. And it's unproven, entirely unproven. We don't know if they can do this or not.
Yeah, her brother's very naive when it comes to the whole political world. He was correct when he said to his sister, oh, they would just chew you up and spit you out if you were to be an advisor, which is true. They did the exact same thing to him. And he cared about the people and everything like that, trying to get peace, which is perfectly fine. But he didn't have that equal balance of being a very clever and ruthless politician, being aware of any potential enemies outside and inside his kingdom. and having the care for his people at the same time. So having the peace treaty was noble enough.
But he was a patriarchal jerk, though, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. It didn't turn out the way he wanted, but in the end, there was continental change, just in the opposite direction.
So as far as his sister's concerned, it's very much, oh, you're still reading your silly books. Ha, 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 your room stinks. Ha, 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 ha. Although, nice touch. That I love the fact that the family are all speaking with Scottish accents, that part of the continent, that's where they keep the Scottish accents in the show.
Yeah.
That I think that's quite entertaining. The idea that maybe when the humans learn to speak, they're going to pick up the accents from the local elves, which is odd, but there we go.
Yeah.
But it's another nice through line that they've managed to get in there. But definitely the way he talks down to his sister and then just disposes of her as a playing piece. It's like, oh, you're going to get married off. Don't worry. He's a widower. It'll be fine.
I mean, and I think that plays very heavily into the difference between that first kill and that second to tie it all back together. Because I think, as we said, that first kill was all about, it was self-defense. Presumably it wasn't a carpetbagger. We'll make that assumption. But it was, presumably in self-defense. And then she goes on this small journey of being told that she, as a princess, is just there for decoration and that she has no real purpose despite being, clearly very invested in the world, interested in the politics, and very shrewd, as we come to learn. And I think we've spoken about the theme of desperation a lot in The Witcher Season 1 and Season 2, particularly when it comes to Yennefer, Francesca, and Fringilla throughout Season 2 and their whole storyline with Volith Mare. A lot of that by the end was driven by desperation. So I think it's really interesting to revisit that theme here with Merwin and her aspirations to become like Solrith. And I think it really is that desperation that drives her to agree to Balor and Eridan's plan and turn on her brother, turn on Fjall's sister and the clans and become empress. Because she wants a life of freedom for herself. She's, I think, aware enough of the world around her through literature and this internal belief that history is bound to repeat itself, that it's, worth it to her, that the ends will justify the means. As far as whether or not their betrayal was justified, I feel for Merwin it was, clearly. For Balor, I feel like that question for him is challenging. He seems to have the mindset that the whole world is against him and nothing is going to change that. I think despite the fact that he has risen from being a lowborn to being an advisor to the king or even a former advisor to the king, it's not enough. So I think for him, he's always going to continue to seek out that power. And Eridan, it feels like he's just kind of along for the ride. I don't think it was necessarily justified for him. So yeah, I feel like he's kind of the wild card among those three.
Balor, that's a prototype of the whole thing with the Brotherhood and later the Sisterhood. It's we have to pull the strings because these guys are fucking idiots.
Yeah.
These inbred morons are not capable of tying their own shoelaces if left to their own devices.
Yeah.
And that whole thing that he's all pissed off in the throne room, it's the position of sage is no longer one of giving advice. It's just, I'm only allowed to give advice now, or whatever he says. He's
magic.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, only advise on magic. Just stick to your area. That's it. And that's really strong. It's if they cut them out, they might just seize power. That these guys are dangerous. This is the first one we get to see behaving like this, and it's a theme that runs throughout.
Their betrayal and the path that I think the three of them have set us on, it's going to take us through the rest of the series, which is really exciting because it almost does, as you said, feel like a prototype or a smaller version of some of the events that we see later in the main series as well.
Which also says Merwin's right. These things do keep repeating as well. It's all there.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the last question that I want to cover before we, close everything out, one of the standout parts for me of this episode and of the series as a whole really was the combat scenes. I was very impressed with Sophia and Lawrence and Michelle, obviously, throughout all of their fight scenes in the pit, during the assassination, the coup at Cintria, even if that wasn't much of a fight, it was still cool to see that fight scene in general. Then obviously Skian as they were fighting at the end. It was a very meaty episode in terms of that. And I wanted to ask, to what extent do you think the combat scenes enhance and drive the narrative of the episode? And then furthermore, how do you think these scenes are an extension of our characters and their internal conflicts? What do we actually learn about them from the way that they fight and their style of fighting?
The fighting is incredible. It's so fluid and so well choreographed. You slightly get thrown off sometimes when people have quick cuts and things. But this one, the opening sequence was done that way with the quick cuts, and it was deliberately designed to be confusing. Whereas, the fighting with the main characters was really quite beautiful. And certainly Éile, I mean, she did some amazing stuff. There was a moment I couldn't help. I just kept going back to it and watching it again and again. After her sister, sadly, who we only just got to meet, got killed, a couple of arrows shot into her, and then there's another one that she just manages to duck, and then to get herself ready for combat, she flips her cloak off. It's just awesome. She just swings it, and it's beautiful, and you can just imagine, the art director and the costume department all high-fiving and hugging each other. It's just like, oh my God, they couldn't have showcased our work better if they had tried.
Yeah.
It's just glorious. And then she's up and moving. And that's the whole thing, that when Geralt's training Ciri says, just keep moving, and she lives that. And it's really, it sort of fills out on her whole thing that she's tried to hide herself away, that she's doing all these stealthy things. She's throwing knives, she's getting up close and slicing people with daggers and things. She's not wailing away with a big sword or anything. It's not out in the open warrior. She's a different kind. And that really suits her well. Whereas Fjall is much more stumbling around, with his big chopper, which has got him into trouble in the past. But here he goes. I mean, I do think the pit, though, has to be possibly the most useless prison I've ever seen in my life. I mean,
yeah,
you could just dig through those earth walls, or there's the really manky old rope out in the open air. I'm sure you could get, and yet she goes out through the hardest bit. She goes through the lock just to prove a point. It's like, hey, I'm stealthy. I can do this shit.
I know. It feels like putting a spider under just like a little cup.
Yeah.
There's not even spikes in it or anything.
No.
What's the point of it?
Yeah.
And there's even bits where like the big timbers have rotted away and there's like little sticks being replaced, and it's like, well, that's nice if this was like a fish drying thing, but it's meant to be a prison. but I did like as well that Fjall's slightly sluggish in the fight, and there's that lovely joke about I hate running, so he throws his axe.
It's honestly a relatable sentiment. I felt seen by Fjall.
But the oddity there is this guy's lying there with 4 inches of axe stuck in his spine, and he still manages to roll over and slice him with a knife. That was a bit of a shock.
Yeah, that makes no sense. Yeah, you have a big axe in your spine. You should be paralyzed from the neck down at that point, if not dead.
I didn't blame Fjall for not checking for a pulse first. I didn't think he did anything wrong there.
No. Yeah, I think the thing that really impressed me, aside from the choreography, which, as I said, I thought was spectacular, I think every single fight we saw drove the narrative in some way. Like the pit fight gave us a little bit of insight into how their fighting styles clash, for one, and also just the inherent animosity between each of the clans. I thought that was excellent. The assassination as well, drove the plot in which her sister was killed. So obviously that pushed the plot forward because it was an instigating event. The assassination in Zintria and the fight between Skian, Fjall, and Éile told us a lot about each of them through their fighting styles, and Skian clocks that as well. She's just like, I'm the master, you're a bumbling idiot, and you've lost your touch and you don't know how to fight as part of a team anymore. And I was like, damn. All of that just from the fight.
And she was totally in command, wasn't she? She totally instigated it as well. She pushed all the right buttons. It's like, let's get you both angry. Let's see what you're made of, without letting them on. That's what she was doing.
Yeah, she made her point so well to both of them and to the audience. So I think it was highly effective. And that was one of the things that I really liked most. I think that not necessarily in The Witcher in general, but in a lot of shows, it just feels like there's fighting for fighting's sake or action for action's sake. As I was going through and analyzing each of these scenes, I really do think that each of them had a purpose, and I love that for the show and the series.
Well, with the fights, it makes sense, because when it comes to the first assassination attempt, Skill with his group of people doing teamwork, you're introduced to his fighting style. You have a little bit of an introduction of Éile's knives during the bar scene, and then during the second attempt, you see how they work. Their fighting styles, accent, their physiques. Mm-hmm. Skill has an axe, which is a lot slower than a sword or a dagger. He's more of a brute-ish sort of...
a tank. Yeah.
And having an axe like that, it's slower. Obviously, he's not going to be running to get a guy that's running away. He's going to throw it, which takes a lot of skill. And then Éile, being smaller in comparison to Skill, has the knives, more swifter stealthier, that sort of thing. Being able to throw a knife across pretty much a courtyard is very skillful. I don't know if that's necessarily practical, but it's very skillful. Obviously, they've had an immense amount of training, but what comes along with that training is to be able to control those emotions, which isn't necessarily practical. That's their fault.
Yeah.
If they stayed where they were in their clans, they would have continued that and honed their complete training, as it were, rather than jumping off that train.
The training train.
Yeah, the training train, being only halfway and having their weaknesses of pushing all the right buttons, which you see in the final fight scene.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see in the assessment of their skills.
There was a lovely touch where Éile actually goes in close and lets Fjall punch her. So he's got the sense of, landed one, but what he's not noticed is that she's used that opportunity to purloin his necklace. I thought that was brilliant. That it's like, you think you won? Oh, fine. Meanwhile, I got what I was looking for, perfectly happy for a bloody nose. But yeah, it was a nice setup to show the two of them going through 8 or 9 people like a hot knife through butter, like no trouble at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have them up against a lone warrior who doesn't even have a sword. She's just using a scabbard at this time. She absolutely beats the crap out of the pair of them. Just wonderful. It really underlines. It's like this sword master, when they say sword master, they're not kidding. Even without a sword, she's phenomenal. Do not mess with her.
I loved that. I think the one missed opportunity I would have liked to see was Éile and Fjall really do feel like they exemplify their clans in terms of fighting style, and they're probably, one of the best. It's like Fjall Stoneheart, and they make a big deal about, like, he's the greatest. And then we can assume the same for Éile as well, that she was quite strong within the Raven clan because her mother is like Mama Raven. I think it would have been cool to just see what the Serpent Clan's fighting style was like. Yeah. But I think the only time that we saw them was when they're banging on the doors of the Centurion courtyard trying to get out, and it's like, oh, nobody's doing some fancy footwork fighting against a monster that's literally vaporizing them. Yeah. So yeah, I think it would have been cool to see a little bit more of that, but I have no regrets about what we saw in the show, though.
But we also got like a theme running through that I'm sure is going to be upsetting Sarah and Alyssa and various other people, which is the lamentable state of medical care in the continent at this time. Fjall gets sliced with a blade and then goes on a ship journey. And then he's riding horses and walking across deserts. And then days and days later, he has the night before at a nice campfire. And it's only the next morning that he thinks of cauterizing his wound, which he's been carrying for days.
Could have been months at this point.
I think really what it came down to is it's the other side of his character. By this time, he's starting to really like Éile. And I think he just wanted an opportunity to take his shirt off in front of her. I think that's what that was all about.
Got to have those every once in a while.
I think so.
Keeps you focused.
Yeah. But saying that, again, this was Sarah O'Gorman directing quite a lot of this.
Yes.
And she'd already shown us in the series before. I mean, she had that amazing sequence at Aretusa where we had 3 sorceresses naked and Triss on the side, and we got no nudity at all, virtually. It was all very tastefully done. And she does that again here. There's lots and lots of opportunities for doing the Game of Thrones kind of fan service and stuff. And every one of them is just turned down. We have loads of scenes in this show and all sorts going on, and there's no gratuitous nudity. It's quite interesting that here we got our topless shot, but it's the dude.
Yeah.
So that was nice. Is there more of that, please?
Yeah, and it's again practical in that he's gotten us stabbed in the torso and he's busy taking care of himself. But yeah, so I think as we kind of look at the episode as a whole, do you guys have any final thoughts on The Witcher Blood Origin, Episode 1 of Ballads, Brawlers, and Bloodied Blades?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a great setup. I didn't know what to expect going in. There's a completely ludicrous level of abuse going on online at the moment, so you can't get anything from criticism at all. It's just ludicrous. People are whinging about Henry Cavill not being in. It's like, nor should he be, not at this point, it's got absolutely nothing to do with Geralt.
We're busy with something else. We'll get back to the main series eventually.
Just crazy, so all of that. And then there's the usual, racist nonsense that you get, here we've actually got, interspecies, racism, these are literally, elves and dwarves and humans and things. Do you really think they've got time to worry about what colour the skin is? It's bizarre. They've got actual differences here, and there's always been that hope that, maybe an alien civilization would start to attack the Earth and everyone would realise we're all humans, but that doesn't seem to be with us even yet. So this is going on. But no, I really enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting to. I was very concerned that they'd cut it down from 6 episodes to 4. I thought it was going to be way too rushed. How are we even going to get into it? And it does go along at a galloping pace, but, I thought episode 1 set things up really well.
Yeah.
So say my main issue with it was the lack of the other character who I love. Meldorf is just amazing. She was such a standout in the rest of the show that, going back and watching episode 1 again specifically for this one, it was just like, if only there'd been a bit of her in here. So I've managed to talk about her a lot, even though she wasn't in it. So sorry about that. But you do understand why.
I do. Then any final thoughts on the episode?
Well, all we need right now is a dwarf backstory. We got the humans, we got the elves, we gotta get all the races in there. Going back to what Geralt says way back in season 1, it's like kingdoms rise and fall like the tide. Dwarves had it first, elves had it second, and then humans had it. So you can just see how the wave of different kingdoms and races have their time throughout the continent. Currently, seeing the elves is quite fun. And it is, like John said, it's going pretty quickly. I haven't seen all the episodes, so we'll see how much of it is rushed or not.
Yeah. Which ones have you watched?
I just watched the first one.
Yeah, you're going to have to definitely let us know in the Discord what you think of episodes 2 through 4. Because both Softie and I have finished it. I really enjoyed the limited series as a whole. And I do think that this first episode was a really nice introduction to, what they're going to set up. It is certainly very economical with how it uses its time. And things are definitely, at a breakneck speed. I assume that they have a good reason for having pared it down to the speed at which it's at. And I do think that we have, in episode 1, just covered everything that we need to know at the ground level. We know who all of our major players are, and there are certainly a lot of them. I think on my first watch, I was definitely, caught up in how many characters there were. But we know our characters and we know the stakes, which is, all I could really ask for out of a pilot. So I was pretty pleased with the first episode. Anything else? Any last words before we head on out of here and say goodbye?
All I would ask is that everyone just keeps being awesome in the Hansa, because it's a lovely community, and I've really enjoyed, the welcome that I've received there. I think the way you run it is just brilliant. People being greeted on the way in, and everyone's made to feel part of it. It's really, really lovely and welcoming. Great space for people to share.
Thanks.
It is very welcoming. It is like a family. If you want to be as invested as some people are in it, you can, or you can just dip your toe in it every once in a while. You're welcomed all the same.
So that is it for our show today. Ben, Softie, thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hansa for listening. You can find both of these guys in the Hansa Discord as active members of our community. Join us as we continue on with Netflix's The Witcher Blood Origin, episode 102 of Dreams, Defiance, and Desperate Deeds. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and a complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeauclair.com. Breakfast and Beauclair is created by Alyssa from Good Morning. It's hosted by Alyssa, the Tidings from Toussaint, News second Brawlers with Richard Blitz. The show is edited by Alyssa with music by Metro Filter Media. Breakfast and Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Louise of Covier, the owner of the Trollish Porpoise, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B. Avo, Gullah B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Mayberg Glamour, Red Kate, the Original Roach, Connor's Cat, Libby, Wolf, Johnny Roblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Salicybe, Sorcerer, Toussaint, Night, Miriam, Maria, Softie, and Mary DeMo. Special thanks to Ben and Softie for joining us for this episode, and our international Hansa for their support.